Welcome to Seaport Strip, the steel track of Ymaq Combat Racing, released for the PlayStation 2. Seaport Strip contains a rather rich history, and the world records within have always been held in high regard. Throughout the years, a small handful of players have planted their name in the history books of this prestigious track. Players who have fought for every inch, every frame, every millisecond. Enjoy the fast-paced driving and killer soundtrack. It's gonna be a ride. Our story begins in April 2015 with Jak and Daxter legends Dexz and Raccoon1337. The two were mostly Jak 2 and 3 runners and frequently did races of the two games as a means for fun competition. One day, they decided to give Jak X a try, a game that wasn't being run nearly as much as the trilogy, despite being an amazing game with plenty of speedrunning potential. The two wanted to find a single track within the game to race against each other to see who could get a better time. Dexz suggested Deathdrome, as it was his favorite track as a kid, but Raccoon recommended Seaport Strip, a track he was very fond of every time he played the game. After playing both of the tracks for a bit, Seaport Strip was quickly seen as the more satisfying track to drive, and so, the two set out on a quest to optimize the track. To start, Seaport Strip is a long track, so it's important to know the spots where you can gain and lose time. The crane, the bridge, the speedway, and the jump at the end. The crane is arguably the most important, as you need a good drift to cut the corner as tight as possible, hopefully without letting go of your boost. In Jak X, there are 4 ways to gain boost. You can either drift for an extended duration of time, perform a jump to gather hang time, pick up the various blue eco capsules scattered across the track, or drive over a boost pad on the ground. The bridge section is very important as well, as there are several boost pads on this turn that you want to avoid. Yes, despite giving you boost, driving over boost pads unintuitively slow you down. The speedway is a series of 2 tough drifts, where it can be extremely easy to bump into the wall and spin out of control. Lastly is the jump, where the goal is to lower your airtime for a more direct approach to the finish line. This can be done by clipping your tires at the very tip of the ramp with a well-timed jump, thus reducing your vehicle's height overall. Hang time is also generally something you want to avoid all over the track, as your vehicle's top speed is only possible when the tires are on the ground. Dexz and Raccoon were also faced with figuring out which of the many vehicles was best suited for time trials. At the time, there was no established scene for individual levels in Jak X, but there were a couple of full game 80% and 100% runs that were useful just to see what people were driving. In most of these early runs, the Javelin X was typically the go-to choice at the tail end of the run, as it was wise to spend your orbs on upgrading one singular vehicle early on, to max out the stats as soon as possible. However, if you're doing time trials, you would just be playing with all vehicles unlocked, and the best vehicle would be fully upgraded anyway. Dexz figured that the obvious choice was the Havoc V12, a nimble and fast car with much better engine and gearbox stats over the Javelin, which, by the way, are both fancy ways of saying speed and acceleration. The Havoc V12 was a wise choice, as it's still the vehicle that's used to this day. The earliest recorded world record in the history of Seaport Strip is a 134.72, set by Raccoon on April 22, 2015. Raccoon put an emphasis on retaining boost throughout the entirety of the run, even if it meant sacrificing some optimal lines from time to time. The only point where Raccoon let go of boost was during the crane drift, just so he could retain better control over the Havoc. Raccoon also went over the boost pad on the bridge, which cost him some time, but back then, this was not yet known to be slower. A fence jump was performed at the beginning of the track that seemed to have a better line to the next section, but Raccoon's ghost pulled ahead a little bit after the jump, so it was hard to tell whether this was quicker or not. Seaport Strip was still in its infancy, and the record would be lowered constantly. Dexz and Raccoon would trade the record back and forth many times. Unfortunately, neither of them decided to highlight any of the runs, as they were both set on getting a good run before submitting a time to the leaderboards. 3 days after Raccoon's 134, Dexz booted up some Seaport Strip after a day of Jak 3 80% runs. I said before that Seaport Strip's record was being lowered constantly, but how low exactly? Low 134s, high 133s? Well, I'll just let the driving speak.
Raccoon. Oh, what is it? It's a 13. It's a goddamn 13.
1:32:13, a whole 2.5 seconds lower. Seaport Strip was getting some real optimization, and a large amount of the time cut was Dex's approach to the track itself. In multiple spots, Dexz played it very risky with the boosts, almost running out at multiple points. He ditched the fence jump at the start, and also avoided the boost pad on the bridge section with a very precise drift, saving him tons of time. Dexz still drops boost during the crane drift to maintain control over the Havoc, but gains it right back as he hugs the right hand side of this train section, which Raccoon's 134 didn't do. It was obvious that Dexz was getting a good handle with JaqX's driving mechanics, and cut some corners extremely close to the walls. A screenshot of Raccoon getting a 132.87 did exist, and supposedly happened the same day he got 134, but unfortunately the evidence has been lost to time. 4 days later, Dexz was back on the Steel Speedway. During his session, he's on a run that had a bit of a wonky start, but the crane drift was smooth, cutting the corner very tight. He gets a good middle section, not running out of boost, and continues to play well. He cuts the first speedway turn inches away from the wall, but a slight bump later on costs him a bit. Dexz is unsure, was it enough?
That was bad. It might be. Ooh, it is. Nice.
1:32:04, a new record by 0.09. While the run was up and down, it was certainly a great showing from Dexz, and he was happy to leave the track for a while. Overall, the two runners had accomplished their goal. They found a fun track to optimize and kickstarted the time trial scene for JaqX. From here on out, records would be difficult to achieve. Any millisecond saved going forwards is a big deal. Such is the way of time trials when things get optimized. And so, the record would stand for 2 months. In June 2015, a new challenger was ready to pursue the record. This is Pull. It's kinda surprising that Pull's name hasn't come up in one of my videos yet. He's honestly got one of the most impressive speedrunning resumes that I happen to know. He's formerly held records in a plethora of Crash Bandicoot games, such as Crash Team Racing, Crash Twinsanity, Crash Bash, but also other miscellaneous titles. Back in 2015, Pull's resume wasn't as large, but he was generally known for being good at racing games. He lowered Crash Team Racing's any percent world record multiple times in 2014, and he set some very solid records in Crash Nitro Kart as well. He was a natural, and JaqX was a perfect fit for his skill set. JaqX has 24 tracks in the game, and if you want great times on all of them, it's a pretty big time commitment. Pull was more quality over quantity oriented. He would find a couple of tracks that he liked, and grinded them to dust. Tracks like Crash City, Waterfront Loop, Frozen Speedway, and of course, Seaport Strip. On June 3rd, 2015, Pull would shatter the 132 barrier with a 131.93, beating Dexz by 0.11 seconds. The following day, Pull would achieve a jaw-dropping 131.66. How was he able to cut off another quarter of a second? Pull was, to put it simply, more confident in his racing lines. On longer straights, such as the tunnel, Pull never swerves his car about or readjusts his angle. He just commits to the line and has faith that it'll work. Pull actually ran out of boost a couple of times during the run, but if you listen closely, there is no change in the noise from the Havoc's engine. Pull effectively labbed out that the Havoc is still nearly at top speed for a full second after losing boost. While it's still better to retain as much boost as possible, it's occasionally better to stay boostless to maintain better lines. Another 1/10 of a second was shaved off on the ending. If we compare Pull's jump to Dex's, it's obvious that his path to the finish line was lower and more direct. Hell, even the crane drift was so tight that Pull was about to reset because he thought he bumped into the wall. He just looked all over the track for time save, and executed on his findings super well. The man was a sucker for perfection, and while this run wasn't exactly that, it was still a bold statement to any future contenders. Without vocalizing it, the run left a subtle message. Come and get me. We're now in May of 2016. A full year has passed, with Pull's record on top. A small Finnish rivalry was forming as Dexz would make his return to Seaport Strip. On May 20th, Dexz had a run that started off rather strong. A good first turn, and barely scraping by the fence at the start. The crane drift was about average, still making good pace so far. Later on, Dexz would find himself spinning out of control after a wonky drift on the bridge, losing him some time. The speedway was really solid, definitely one of Dex's strong points on the track. Now in this moment, this is where the nerves start to kick in, as you realize that you essentially only have one turn left to do, and one big leap to the end. But you're also nervous in the sense of uncertainty. When a track is so optimized, it can be hard to tell whether the run was good enough to be a new record, or just sloppy enough to miss it by a hair. And as Dexz approached the jump, all he could do was watch that timer tick. (1:31.66), a world record tie to the millisecond. Dexz had officially closed the gap on Pull, proving that he ultimately had what it took to take the record back. 1 day later, Pull would get this run.
Oh yeah, I beat you all!
1:31.65. Yep, an improvement by the smallest margin possible, 0.01. Even after not playing the track for a year, Pull came back to reclaim his record after only trying for 1 day. His YouTube description said he would come back and improve his time if someone beat him. And at the time, nobody did, at least for a while. Back then, there weren't too many active Jack X runners, and Dexz didn't care too much to trade the record back and forth, so the competition would come to a rest. But let's back up a little. Let's go back to April 2015 again, when Dexz and Raccoon first started grinding Seaport Strip. The yearly speedrun event, ESA, was coming up in a couple of months, and a handful of Jack players were interested in attending the event, including Dexz and Raccoon. Raccoon flew all the way from Austria to Finland to meet up with Dexz. As the legend goes, or, well, the truth, the two crossed the Gulf of Bothnia by boat and drove all the way down through Sweden together on a big old road trip, and arrived at the ESA venue at the grand hour of 2 a.m. Now, any sensible human being would probably go to sleep to maintain a good schedule and wake up at a reasonable hour the next morning. But Dexz and Raccoon immediately started setting up their PS2s, and attempts of Seaport Strip ensued. Speedrunners, am I right? No footage of the two playing Jack X exists, but you can find some old pictures and videos of other Jack games being played. It was a fun time, and as the two were playing the track on and off throughout the week, they would reel someone else into trying the stage. You see that guy with the thin black hoodie? Well, that's me. While I did get hooked on Seaport Strip at the event, I only played the stage on and off casually for a few years. In 2017, however, I noticed that Pull's record had stood for over a year, and I wanted to do something about it. I got world record, I think. I did it. 1:31.58, a new record by 0.07. After honing my skills and throwing myself at the track over and over again, I had taken down Pull. I think what really saved me on this run was my crane drift. I intentionally went really far to the right and only dropped boost for a fraction of a second to retain the most amount of speed and a good line afterwards. I took a page out of Dex's book on the first speedway turn, but the second one lost me at least a tenth, so a 0.4 was certainly possible. But in a way, I didn't really care. I drove my red and white Havoc V12 across the finish line faster than anyone in the world, and I was feeling great. But my celebration would be cut short. I suddenly remembered that damn YouTube description. And oh yeah, he kept his word. Pull was back. 131.41. Just like that, only 2 days later, Pull had done it again. It's crazy how a player can be so absent for such a long time to then come back to dominate the track once more. This was no ordinary improvement either. No, Pull beat my time by 0.17. That's a fairly big amount considering the track was pretty optimized now. Pull had adopted my wide approach to the crane drift, but for the first time in the track's history, full boost was kept throughout the entire duration. The rest of the run was just really clean overall. A good tunnel, a good bridge, speedway, everything just lined up. Again, lower was always possible, but this was probably the best looking run of the track so far. Pull was simply in a league of his own. Anytime he would set a time on the track, people would look at the run and question if they even stood a chance. Even if you beat him, Pull was seemingly ready to pounce and take his throne back within a matter of days. And because of this, gunning for the record seemed like a wasted effort for some. But for others, they didn't care. They wanted to give Seaport Strip a try regardless. If they got world record, sick. If they didn't, well, they had fun regardless. This was the mentality of two new players. Muckemannen, a Swedish runner who is mainly known for being the king of Ratchet Deadlocked, and Natty, one of Pull's friends and also an excellent runner of Crash Team Racing. Mucka was already off to a great start, getting a 131.57 in August 2017, and on his speedrun.com submission, he seemed eager to grind for the record. Fast forwarding to June 2018, he had a run that was ahead of Pull after the crane drift, but would fall behind entering the bridge. A tiny bump on the first speedway drift would spill the death of this run being a new record. 131.50, a valiant effort. Mucka described his grind to be very frustrating, as he felt he had better runs, yet the timer at the end said otherwise. He had problems gauging whether or not he was actually improving his driving skills, as he felt when he had a good run, somehow it's 0.2 slower than what he expected. And suddenly, you start having doubts about your abilities. It's a feeling anyone who's played Seaport Strip can relate to. Natty started off what seemed a bit less promising perhaps. His first submitted run was a 131.96, respectable but over half a second away from the record. This was rather deceiving though, as he was still new to the game, and in due time, his racing game skills were gonna blossom. A few days later, he had chipped away at his PB and uploaded a 131.58, which at the time tied me for second place. On May 31st, 2017, it seemed like Natty was about to take down his friend that brought him into the game. Brutal. Natty touched the exact same wall that Mucka had bumped into. He would drive the run out regardless and achieve a 131.45, 0.04 away from the record. The bump itself didn't even look that bad, but that's how optimized we're getting now. Any small error can make or break a record, and this run was just not meant to be. Natty, despite being on a roll, just stopped playing the track. The record was practically right in front of the two players, but that's easy to say. Who knows how many hours they spent afterwards attempting to close the gap. And so, Pull's 131.41 continued to reign. This time though, instead of waiting for someone to beat his run, Pull would take to lowering the track himself. On July 5th, 2018, Pull was doing attempts of Seaport Strip, and man, his driving was looking better than ever before. At this point, the improvements that I'm going to be pointing out are going to be really subtle. It's a battle for inches now on the steel track. Pull had a run that was nearly identical to his 131.41 in the first minute, being dead even by the bridge section. Then we see the first big improvement. Pull had made his boost route even tighter by just barely scraping by one of the blue eco capsules on this highway. In previous runs, we would go all the way further to the right to grab 2 capsules instead, which resulted in a wider line. His speedway drifts were nice and tight, cutting it close to the walls and not spinning out too much. After a great jump to the finish line, a new record was imminent.
I beat all you cherries.
1:31:28, a new record by 0.13. Pull was seemingly squeezing the track completely dry of time save, but believe it or not, he actually wasn't satisfied with the run despite there being essentially no flaws. His YouTube description reads, "Never mind, 0.1x is the goal I guess. It's not even that good." I would join the competition with a small return to Seaport Strip and set a 1:31:35. Once again, another run fairly close to the record, but by the looks of it, only Pull was able to push the track lower. And push the track lower he would. The very next day after his 1:31:28, he would achieve a 1:31:24. A tiny improvement, but everything counts. While he really wanted to continue for a 1:31:1x, being a runner of so many games, Pull had other matters to attend to. Previous world records set by Pull typically stood for about a year or so, until someone wanted to challenge it or until he wanted to improve it. But this time, Seaport Strip would truly enter hibernation, as no record improvements would happen on the track for 3 years. This isn't to say the game wasn't being played, however. It was just being played in a slightly different way. Let's talk about shortcuts. Whether intended by the developers or not, shortcuts are always a surefire way to completely break tracks wide open, usually opening the floodgates for new world records. Between 2018 and 2021, several shortcuts were found on many of Jackx's other tracks. Most of it was thanks to players Mobius, Scarletra, and Boss, all of whom started setting records with the new skips. Sometimes it can be as simple as the skip on Deathdrome, which was broken with a tight jump over a railing to skip a spiral. And sometimes it's completely ridiculous. Take Haven City for example. At around the 50-second mark in the track, you drive up the wall and flip the car in the air to then continue along the track on the other side. And that's not even the craziest part. 15 seconds later, this happens. Yeah, and keep in mind, this was happening all over the game, even warranting some tracks to have a category split between skips and no skips. The first ever shortcut in the game's history was actually found by Pull on the track Loading Docks back in 2017. At around the 15-second mark in the track, Pull ramps off of a small railing to gain a ton of height to make his way onto a platform where he crashes into the wall. This gives Pull a checkpoint that's located further into the level, and he's able to save 2 seconds after respawning. It's not much, but it was enough to net him the world's first run of the track in under a minute. Loading Docks is a track with similar assets to Seaport Strip, so perhaps a way to break the Steel Speedway was in sight. A similar checkpoint skip was found on the track Western Tour, a longer track with a small Seaport Strip section near the end. After doing a similar ramp jump and flying over a crash barrier, you're able to skip a third of Western Tour as the game respawns you in front of the finish line. And by the way, the boost being misaligned with the car is a glitch on early versions of the PS4 port. Hilarious, but it was patched later on. Some runners attempted to do similar jumps in Seaport Strip to skip to later checkpoints. It was tried everywhere, in every spot, but the track wouldn't bend to our will. Mobius found a way to climb the crash barrier on the speedway to make his way into the Deathdrome section. After driving for a bit, the robot that tracks when you're going the wrong way zaps you and respawns you back to where you need to be. You do spawn a bit further ahead than before, but this was way slower than driving the intended way. Pull actually knew of an easier and faster method of getting around the crash barrier. Hilariously, there's just a gap on the left-hand side that you can squeeze through. Though again, driving the normal way was still faster. Try as you might, steel is a hard material to break, and Seaport Strip was stubborn. It seemed that the only way the record was going to be beaten was the old-fashioned way. If you wanted to beat Pull, you had to drive fair and square, with better boost management and more refined racing lines. Was anyone up to the task? Well, I did mention 3 new players not too long ago, and while they were good at breaking tracks, were any of them good enough to contend for the record on Seaport? Boss was definitely a player most people had their eyes on, at the time seen as the most ambitious up-and-coming Jackx star. Hailing from Greece, he was already a fairly skilled full-game runner, being a multi-time world record holder in the All Cups category. In 2021, Boss decided to tackle time trials and was tearing through the game at a rapid pace, setting records on every track, to the point where he had every single one, except, well, you already know. Boss knew Seaport Strip was going to be a tough grind, so he went with a very methodical approach. He wrote down the exact time of Pull's run for every major point in the track, just to see exactly where he was gaining and losing those milliseconds. Even before doing attempts, Boss was in the lab on emulator and pioneered a rather simple strategy. He figured out that drifting certain corners throughout the game was slower than just turning normally. So he went to Seaport Strip and timed specific turns with and without drifting. The time save wasn't much, but it was there. A small tactical advantage was a warm welcome for the toughest record in the game. He had done the homework, but could he put it all to use? Well, he had to, if he wanted the sweep. (1:31:23), a new world record by 0.01. It took making splits, coming up with new strategies, and days of trying to beat Pull by 1/100th of a second. Boss was happy that the sweep was complete, but wasn't overly thrilled with the way he got to the top, so he kept playing Seaport Strip for lower, to hunt for that infamous .1 that Pull had alluded to years back. 5 days later, he was on a monster pace of a run, but the infamous speedway bump continued to curse the track. Not only that, Boss clipped the lamppost on the very final jump. Even with those mistakes, it was still a new record by, 0.01. The mistakes left a sour taste in Boss's mouth, so he kept pushing, knowing that any run could be the one. And his patience would ultimately pay off, as he finally got what he came for. 1:31:17, the grind was over. He posted the time in the Jack Speedruns Discord server, and we were all happy for him. But most importantly, he was happy himself. Now that the record was in someone else's hands again, guess who's back? Pull had found new motivation to start the engine once again. But before jumping into attempts, Pull took the emulator route himself. He felt that the new non-drifting strats opened the doors to lower the track even further. So he double-checked for any loose ends that Boss might have missed in his timing, and further extended the potential time save. He optimized multiple turns on the track, and improved his boost route. Now, he was ready. Over the course of 3.5 years, the record had only fallen by 0.07. While every millisecond counts, it perhaps wasn't more because Pull wasn't playing. When someone challenges his record, he will take it back. And only days after Boss's new record, history would repeat itself. In December 2021, if it wasn't clear before, it would be made clear now that Seaport Strip was Pull's track. 1:30:85. A complete decimation of the track. Pull played Seaport Strip for a week straight to push the track as far as he could with the new strategies, setting 8 world records in a row until he landed on the fabled 1:30:85. A beautiful demonstration and the cleanest run we've seen in the track's history. This is where the world record stands today, and to put it blunt, nobody's really all that close to beating him. Pull has maintained legendary status on Seaport Strip. He put so much time into examining the track, and put in the attempts to get the time he wanted. His journey has been glorious to witness. These days, most of the world records in the game are a mixture between Boss and Scarletra. However, it seems like Pull isn't losing his only record anytime soon. Sub 130 is definitely something we would all love to see happen on the track, but Pull can only realistically see himself get a time in the 137x range, but you never know. Perhaps new tech could be discovered, or a shortcut could bring the time down. Seaport Strip currently only has 14 runs on speedrun.com, yet the track has been pushed so far with the few people we've had. Even notable Jak Trilogy runners like Wotan, Stellar, and Outrageous Josh have all given Seaport Strip a whirl just to see what the fuss was all about. Josh in particular described the track to be very addicting, the feeling that a PB could be right around the corner, and if you mess up, restarting only takes a few seconds. In 2018, I was invited to what would roughly be translated to Good Morning Denmark. And on the show, I was there to talk about my life as a speedrunner. They wanted me to speedrun through a stage in any of the games I was good at, and I decided that I wasn't going to showcase anything with glitches. I wasn't about to have the whole glitches are not cheating conversation on live TV. So I decided to pick a rather glitch-free stage, and now you can probably see where this is going. Okay, I'm just gonna make a bunch of excuses as you're watching this footage. I couldn't see the screen at all. It was a bright and sunny day, and the sun glare on the TV was really bad. Oh, also, they made me play on this laggy LCD display with a ton of input delay, so yeah, not the most ideal setup. In fact, I drove into a wall in front of tens of thousands of viewers only 15 seconds in. But you know what? I had fun, and I was happy about the opportunity. I finished with a mediocre 137, but hey, I just wanted to mention this to say that, yes, Seaport Strip has literally been on national television. You're famous now, buddy. From Raccoon and Dex's early endeavors to the tug of war between Pull and the crowd, Seaport Strip is a track that has remained true to the spirit of the game. Ymaq is a fast-paced racing game where getting good times rely on your ability to master the fundamentals. Fundamentals you only attain through rigorous practice and patience for grinding. If you're interested in speedrunning Ymaq or playing the game's multiplayer again, there are links to the discords in the description. Whether Pull's reign will be challenged in the future, or new discoveries will be found to push the time down, only time will tell. Regardless of what's next, the history of Seaport Strip will live on. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, please consider subscribing and supporting me on Patreon. Take care, and have a good one.